If you've been watching the news recently, then you know basically World War III has started. Maybe not officially, but kind of unofficially. We've been kind of inching towards this greater conflict. And I want to talk about it today because at the beginning of last week, like Tuesday and Wednesday, there was this pager attack in these walkie-talkie attacks in Lebanon. And essentially, from the reporting that's come out and what I've read, is that shipments going into Lebanon were intercepted by Israeli Secret Service, Special Forces, clandestine, whatever you want to call them. And those devices were taken apart and explosives were put in them, and then they were shipped on to Lebanon. They activated this plan and detonated those devices on Tuesday and Wednesday, killing at least 37 people, according to the different news reports that I've read, but possibly higher, and injuring thousands of people. And this is an unprecedented attack, something that we've never seen before. And it's quite surprising. Maybe not from Israel, because they've done this kind of stuff before in the past where they don't really seem to have any respect for human rights or for international laws. They've broken it time and time again. And I think this attack is really interesting because it's a shift, much like their defense minister said. It's a new phase of warfare. And if the United States doesn't come out and condemn this and investigate it, research it, find out who's actually responsible, and then sanction those parties, it's opening up a new front that I don't think the United States quite realizes what they're allowing by not condemning this attack. So far, I've seen no comments from the White House other than we're investigating it or we believe Israel was responsible for it. There's been no condemnation, there's been no sanctions, there's been no talk of sanctions, and I think that this is a turning point, because if the United States does not sanction Israel over a clear terrorist attack, the Israeli government, or CIA, whatever they are, whoever their clandestine organization is, whatever they call themselves, Mossad or whatever, if they detonated these devices without having any idea of who was holding them. They don't know if children were playing with them because they don't know, right? They literally put explosives into devices and sent them off to another country with the plan of detonating them at some point in the future, which they did, without having any clear indication of who was holding that device at that time. Now, all the Western newspapers and reports are saying, oh, it's Hezbollah, we attacked Hezbollah. You don't know who you attacked, because Hezbollah has family. They're people. So the wife, who has nothing to do with Hezbollah, just happens to be married to a guy who's trying to, stand up for his beliefs and defend his country in the way that he thinks is right. She has nothing to do with it. She could have had the pager because she was going out to do errands. And he said, take this in case I need to get in touch with you. The walkie-talkies could be, any old guard sitting at a building, just, night shift, day shift, whatever, just a guard. Has nothing to do with Hezbollah, but some boss gave him a walkie-talkie and said, if you see anything suspicious, call it in. Nothing to do with Hezbollah, and now it's blown up in his little guard shack and he's injured or killed. So there's no way of knowing who had those devices at the time of the detonations. Therefore, it is not a military attack, it's a terrorist attack. The idea is to create panic and fear. And that's exactly what it did. And so if that isn't condemned by all nations and saying this is an unacceptable form of warfare, this is a terror attack, then you're opening up the door to say, well, in conflict, things happen. Because that's kind of what the newspapers are trying to say, at least the Western ones are trying to say that, well, they're in a conflict with each other, so it's kind of, it's an attack, it's okay, is essentially what they're trying to weasel out, is that this was okay. But that opens the door to a whole bag of worms they don't want to open a door to, because think about where the United States gets most of its electronics. And I'm not talking about the high-end electronics. I'm talking about your toasters, your bread makers, your microwaves, your everyday household appliances. Most of those are built in China and then shipped to the United States under a brand that's claiming to be an American brand, right? They put their brand on it. They mark it up by 10 to 15%, maybe even 50 or 60, 100%, whatever their margins are that they can get away with, and then sell it in the United States as American products or has American brands. But all those electronics are built and manufactured in China. So if you say that this attack that Israel carried out against Lebanon is not condemned and not sanctioned, then you're saying that this form of warfare is okay. Which means then the United States would need to stop importing everything from China immediately. Because if you're saying this is okay, then China has the right to start putting explosive devices into every appliance that goes to the United States for the future of possibly one day they could detonate it. Because that's exactly what Israel just did. If it turns out that it's Israel, which everybody knows that it's Israel. Who else would have it been? So if the United States doesn't come out and condemn this attack and sanction the Mossad and whoever was responsible, generals and defense ministers and whoever else is responsible in Israel, and say this was unacceptable, then they've opened up the door for just about any manufacturer to implant explosive devices into their products. Because you're saying this is an acceptable form of warfare if you don't condemn it. And as the United States and China continue to creep ever closer to some sort of armed conflict, most likely over Taiwan, possibly in Ukraine, if Russia continues to advance, there will be more and more NATO support. And if NATO fully engages, which is basically what they've done, Russia considers NATO fully committed at this point if they continue to allow long-range weapons. This is why I said World War III is basically started. The Middle East is completely engulfed in this conflict. In Gaza and Lebanon, Iran is involved in it now. Iraq is involved in it now. More and more countries are eventually going to have to pick a side because Israel's not stopping. Mostly because the United States hasn't created conditions to force them to stop. And by creating conditions to force them to stop is cut off all funding. Say, we're not going to fund you anymore in any terms. No funding for humanitarian efforts, for military, for anything, right? You threaten that, you cut off their funding, they'll say, okay, we'll consider a ceasefire within the next year, and then if they don't do that, then it's gone, right? You cut off the funding, right? You can come to agreements and you can impose sanctions. You can impose all kinds of things that can reduce or slow down this ever-growing conflict in the Middle East. But because there's no leadership in the United States right now, Israel understands that it can get away with continuing its aggression to its neighbors. Unfortunately, the neighbors do have some capabilities to fight back. Not so much in Gaza, but Lebanon does have more capabilities. Iran has more capabilities. And other neighbors have more capabilities. So that's how it becomes a bigger and bigger conflict there. Essentially, NATO is not looking for any terms of a peace agreement with Russia and Ukraine, and as a matter of fact, seems to be foolish enough to think that they can actually take on Russia and have some sort of acceptable win. I just don't see the win. Where's the win if NATO continues to fund Ukraine and to supply weapons to Ukraine? Essentially, Russia will say we're at war with NATO, which is basically what they said. If you allow these long-range weapons to be fired into Russia, then we're not at war with Ukraine, we're at war with NATO. And Russia's basically said that, and said that if this continues, we are willing to go all the way to a nuclear conflict. which to me seems so stupid. Like, what is NATO gaining from this? I don't understand what they're gaining from this, because if they went to the negotiation table and negotiated a peace agreement, Ukraine would lose some of its land for sure. But you could stop it. The other alternative is you keep pumping money into this, and you keep pumping weapons into this, and you keep this war machine going that is in Russia now fully up and running. It's basically a wartime economy at this point, where they're producing drones and they're producing ammunition and they're ready for this fight. They just activated like 2.5 million members of the military, basically. Their army's growing, their economy is retooling and refocusing on this conflict because Russia's expecting, and with good reason, expecting that the fight is going to be between NATO and Russia. But this could all end. You could go to the negotiation table and say, let's talk. What do you want from Ukraine? What land would satisfy a peace agreement? And Ukraine would have to lose some land. But again, consequences for your actions. Ukraine never had to start this war and never had to engage in this war for as long as it's engaged in this war. Now, you will say, oh, Russia started it. Yeah, Russia came across the border. But all the actions that led up to Russia coming across that border could have been negated had you had sensible people in office and you had people that said NATO doesn't need to be here. Ukraine can be Ukraine and it doesn't need NATO. But, of course, it's a big money laundering opportunity for many people. Lots of people have a lot of money at stake and are making a lot of money because all that aid that's coming out of the U.S. Treasury, they're printing new dollars to go to Ukraine that gets cycled through Ukraine and then back to the defense contractors, and everybody's making money. But the problem with that is, sure, everybody's making money, but people are losing their lives. And all the pawns, all those little guys, the people that end up actually on the front lines, they're the ones who suffer because of some people wanting a higher profit margin. And it makes no sense to me. But again, these are the people at the top who have no regard for human life because they're not willing to condemn a clear terror attack in Lebanon by supposedly the Israeli forces. Because that's pretty black and white in my mind. You can argue all day about Russia and who's responsible for the conflict. Was it because NATO pushed too far, or is it because Russia wanted land, or whatever. You can argue that, and there is some, I would say, gray area for who's truly responsible for that. But an attack like that in Lebanon, that's pretty black and white. Because you don't know who's going to have those devices. And the fact that the people in power aren't coming out and condemning this type of attack shows how little they care for human life. They don't care about any of us. They care about profit because they can live their luxurious lifestyles doing whatever they want and whoever they want without a care in the world. And I mean, I think, like, I don't necessarily believe that there's evil in the world, but there are people that have no morals. They have no compass, and they're willing to destroy anything and everything for profit. And I think that's kind of why you're having this kind of global conflict now, is because there are some people in some societies and some traditions and some holdouts, so to say, some cultures that say, no, we don't want to pursue profit to the point of complete destruction of humanity, of our values that we hold, of anything that we consider sacred. Whereas in the United States, it's clear that they're going to keep this going until it's no longer profitable. They'll dump old military equipment, they'll dump money, they'll dump all kinds of stuff into Ukraine with the idea that they're going to stop Russia. I don't see it. So when I said World War III is kind of starting, it seems like there's becoming more and more of a divide. More and more countries, more and more people have to pick a side as this continues. You know, at the beginning, you're like, oh, I hope it'll be over in a couple of months. seems crazy. But we're going into a year long, and the Gaza conflict is coming up, like almost, 3 years with the Ukraine situation. And it doesn't seem like NATO or the Israelis are looking to slow down. And it seems like it's only intensifying, which that's a world war, basically. Once you start getting everybody involved, and as more and more people have to pick a side in terms of where they're going to send their supplies, that's a world war. And that's, again, a little bit scary, because this time we have really destructive weapons that I think a lot of people have forgotten how damaging it can be. I'm not even talking about nuclear. I'm just talking about some of the weapons that we have created as humans are completely destructive. I mean, you can see what happened in Gaza. You can see some of these clips of what's happening in Ukraine and also in Russia now because of the long-range missiles. It's not good for people. And I just don't see what the point of the conflict is. At this point, it just seems like it's immoral and it's a bit of a money grab. It's like the money laundering. You have people coming out like Lindsey Graham saying that the only reason we're in Ukraine is because we want their resources.
They're sitting on $10 to $12 trillion of critical minerals in Ukraine. They could be the richest country in all of Europe. I don't want to give that money and those assets to Putin to share with China. If we help Ukraine now, they can become the best business partner we ever dreamed of. That $10 to $12 trillion of critical mineral assets could be used by Ukraine and the West.
You're like, are we still at that stage that we're fighting over resources? Have we not evolved past that? And resources is profit. So still fight over money, which is so crazy. But anyways, I've rambled on for way too long about this. I think that the United States should condemn this attack that happened in Lebanon. And I think that they should look to sanction some of the operatives that are involved in that. Because if they don't, that opens up a whole new level of warfare, which, I mean, we literally have international laws against. So if they don't condemn these attacks, China might start putting things in. I don't think China would do that, but if you're saying it's an acceptable form of warfare, then why not? It's clearly effective in terms of a terror attack. Clearly people were terrified. And effective in terms of disrupting the communications, disrupting the everyday life of people in Lebanon. So if they don't come out and condemn it within like the next week or something, it's such a crazy thought to think that they'll just let it go and that there will be no consequences for this type of action. And I think this is one of the things that I hate a lot about it is the international laws apply to everyone but the people who made them. The United States won't come out and condemn Israel. They won't sanction Israel. But if China did this, or if Russia did this, or if Iran did this, it would have been, it would have literally been a declaration of war from NATO or from the United States. But because the ally Israel did it, it's like, well, they're in conflict, things happen, maybe we'll just wait a couple of weeks and hopefully everybody forgets about it and then we don't actually have to do anything, which is crazy to me. Anyways, what are your thoughts? I always love to read the comments and see what you guys are thinking. Let me know down below, and I will see you in the next video.